All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, or I guess it's still good morning, but when we sit down for lunch, that's kind of our transition period to afternoon. For those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet before, my name's Gary Painter, and I direct the U.S. Cecil Price Center for Social Innovation. Professor in the Price School for the last 22 years or so, and I wanted to share a little bit about our mission here at the Price Center. If you haven't explored our website and had a chance to interact with some of the programming that we've been able to bring to the community, we focus on developing ideas and illuminating strategies to improve the quality of life for people living in low-income urban communities. And we fulfill that mission through research, through student engagement and learning, and community engagement and events like this speaker series. It's our objective to make sure that our USC community has the opportunity to really learn what people who are social innovators are doing and to understand better how to interact in that sphere. This afternoon, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this talk with Kat Taylor and welcome her to the Price Center. Many of you know about her background, but let me just introduce her briefly. Kat Taylor is the co-founder and co-CEO of Beneficial State Bank, which is a community development financial institution, and it's also a certified B Corporation. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, she's going to share, but we also have a Q&A period at the end that we can have questions from the audience about what some of those legal structures and kind of associational structures can do for the kinds of activities that you might want to engage in either currently now in your organization or after, for other students in the room, after you graduate in the work that you do. This model is focused on bringing beneficial banking to low-income communities in an economically and environmentally sustainable manner. The bank's revolutionary ownership mandates that any distributed profit be investing in low-income communities that it serves and in the environment. So Kat is also founding director of Tomcat Ranch Educational Foundation, which is dedicated to inspiring a sustainable food system through ranching, training, tours, research, and school garden and food programs. TKREF, as the acronym knows, owns the social enterprise Left Coast Grass-Fed, which raises humanely raises cattle and other livestock for the benefit of people and the planet. And Kat serves on a number of nonprofit boards, including the Harvard Board of Overseers, EcoTrust, Good Samaritan Family Resource Center, ProPublica, Curiosity, Insight Prison Project, QED, and the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. So you may, for us, it's been a little bit of a challenge to find the right time given that long list of activities that Kat has, but we're so pleased to have her today to share with our university community. So without any further ado, Kat, let me welcome you to kind of talk a little bit about your work. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you all very much for this opportunity. So, keep a fire burning in your eyes. Pay attention to the open skies. You never know what will be coming down. Perhaps a better world is drawing near, or just as easily it could all disappear, along with whatever meaning you might have found. Don't let the uncertainty turn you around. Go on and make a joyful sound. So I make people uncomfortable by singing all the time because I'm going to talk about banking today, and I have to convince you that banking and the banking system is super, super important in spite of the fact that it's boring and complicated. I'm also likely going to make people uncomfortable because I think it's time to start telling the truth about our past and where we are and the origins of this country. So apologies in advance, and please know I love human beings and I am an optimist, and I think we actually have a huge solution set in front of us, and we're all going to be part of that. But what are we to do not to succumb to a world preordained by the biggest bank robbery ever? The theft of a peaceful, prosperous, equitable future from young people, now mostly of color, by predominantly old white people. Notwithstanding my tattoos, I'm one of those old white people. But I'm going to be part of the solution. I yearn for the day that no categorization is needed or warranted except existentially, but we are judged by what we do, not who we are. But I know that rescue and redemption from where we are will not come from treating the symptoms of that crime. We can't donate our way out of this one. Both to fix permanently and to recruit the patience for this transition, Nothing less than systemic reform will do. We must open the camera aperture wide and take into consideration the values of all our stakeholders and optimize to benefit for all and harm to none. So no sideline spectating tolerated anymore. No even telling the cops that the robbers went that-a-way. Like they said in the 60s, which I do remember, if you aren't part of the solution, you are most totally part of the problem. And that's why I have devoted myself to changing the banking system for good, along with my treasured colleagues, many of whom are in the room today. So, I believe, at least metaphorically, that banking is a quasi-public system that has been given enormous prerogatives from government and its depositors, and therefore, it is the most powerful and original form of crowdfunding. You will have heard of crowdfunding likely from Indiegogo, Kickstarter, organizations like that. But it's basically the same in banking, that we've all pooled our idle cash, called deposits, into a massive system, given it a lot of power, so that it will finance the world that we actually wish to live in. The banking system is enormously powerful due to these prerogatives, and therefore drives enormous determinative social, as societal, as well as economic outcomes. First, we give it FDIC insurance. That's paid for by the banks through the premiums, but we know, given the last Great Recession, that if the FDIC insurance fund is threatened, the American taxpayer quickly stands behind it. And that allows banks to collect up to $250,000 risk-free per account. So that means it's enjoying a massive and low-cost funding flow. Second, the banking system is allowed to leverage its equity capital at least 10 times with that low-cost funding. So it has exponential effect. Third, lending, which is the primary activity of banks, is a recycling model. We lend money out, it comes back, we lend it again. So the impact of lending accumulates over time and is very, very powerful compared to one-time expenditures, say, made by government. Finally, banking practice is very disciplined. It may not be disciplined for what we wish it to be achieving, but we know what it's doing because it's heavily, heavily regulated. So we should insist that such a powerful, publicly endowed system serve a public purpose. It essentially belongs to us. But in spite of our efforts through regulation and other measures, it hasn't been serving the public interest for some time. It has been dragging, and this is my only Debbie Downer segment, a train of misery. It's hard to update this slide often enough. So $360 billion now, I think, in fines have been paid by the biggest banks in the system, mostly for consumer abuse. And it's just a cost of doing business. These are among the most profitable corporations in the world, and that is a very small number considering the top institutions are now well over $2 trillion in assets. One of them had a $4 billion capital account error ride their balance sheet for a whole year. For those of you in accounting, that seems shocking. But in fact, $4 billion is a very small number compared to $2 trillion. It did cancel their dividend. In addition, almost 5 million families lost their homes in the most recent foreclosure. I heard someone who's actually a public advocate for consumers say, well, what do the banks have to do with that? Well, the banks were standing between the mortgage brokers and the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, the government service entities that are allowed to buy those mortgages, and they were well aware of what was going on either side. In fact, some of them got tripped up in the pipeline risk of when the housing bubble finally burst. But those foreclosures represent the transfer of wealth from households generally with the lowest resources to households with the very highest. And it's disproportionately punishing to communities of color. Those are the statistics of how much more harm came to those communities that are African American or Latino. 1/3 of bank tellers are on some form of public assistance. If you think about that, that's a shocking transfer of private costs to a public system. And remember, these are the most profitable companies in the world, so for goodness sakes, why can't they pay their workers enough? And then $250 billion were financed in the last 5 years to the coal industry. I have enormous empathy for coal communities and coal workers. We have such a rapidly changing economy that we're leaving vast sectors of people behind. and it leaves their communities at peril as well. But coal is no future. There is no future in that, not even just from a climate standpoint. Most of the big coal companies declared bankruptcy some time ago, transferred their pension liabilities to us, the American taxpayer, and are eking out the last reserves of coal in the face of extreme climate destabilization. So enough of that, because we have good news. We can stop dragging that train of misery, and we can fix the banking system together. We can take back our power of choice. We can align our banking with our values. We can pioneer a new model that shows the bigger banks how to migrate deposit equity and human capital to better practices. And we can, as a result, increase the benefit and the resiliency of the banking system as a whole. With $12 trillion of deposits in that system, it's one of the largest dynamics in the American economy, so we should get it right. Beneficial State Bank is an innovator by design and mission so that we can change the banking system for good. It's our job at BSB to awaken the agency and accountability of everyone over their banking. That means their choice and their responsibility. If you don't know where your money is sleeping at night, it is most likely working against your most treasured values. That deserves a pause. I can say that with some assurance because that's the reality of 95% of bank assets being in the control of the biggest money center banks. I can guarantee you that they are complicit in abusing consumers, that their lending practices are likely extending fossil fuels' grip on the economy and supporting mass incarceration, and their corporate practices are impoverishing their own employees. We just saw that slide. These hard truths are not insurmountable. As a multi-stakeholder model, we at Beneficial State Bank serve customers, employees, communities, the planet, and shareholders in equal measure, and that makes the system come round right. We have to have a theory of change, though, because as a small bank in the system, we know it's not enough to be a good bank in a bad system, and we know we can't replace that system. So we need allies. Our theory of change is that first we must prove a bank model that serves a multi-stakeholder group, provides benefit to all and harm to none, and is economically viable, meaning we can compete in the modern banking marketplace and still return a profit to our shareholders and satisfy our regulators. Very, very important responsibilities. So the allies that we have to actually shift the system are those large regional banks. I'm sorry to say the biggest money center banks, and I don't mean to disparage anyone in the room who might work for one of them because I love the people who work at these banks, but the business model is stuck. It's very hard to pivot those big banks. However, the large regionals and other banks in their midst are starved for deposit equity and human capital, and they will do a lot of things to take market share. So what we're going to do, and are in the process of doing, and have seen signs of, is creating a playbook. I'm going to tell you all about the playbook next, but the point of it is not just to operate well ourselves, but to hand off and open source that playbook to these large banks. So increasingly they migrate to the model that we have and win the market share wars in the process. So where are we now? The bank has grown through 4 acquisitions and a strong organic growth to about $1 billion in assets across the 3 West Coast states, which represent an intact bioregion for us. Very important to follow nature's lines, not just political ones. We now are closing in on 260 colleagues, 17 branch offices. We are converting onto a common core platform that transcends the oligopoly of bank platforms that was handed to us. It turns out to change the banking system for good, you also have to change the bank vendors. And we hope to be done with that next fall. And then we will be able to proliferate a product set that is the full measure of opportunity for the customers we most need to serve. Those are individuals, households, communities, commercial businesses, nonprofits, municipalities. And the product set runs from pre-prime auto loans to large commercial loans to municipal banking services like Lockbox. We have to be all things to all people. People don't separate out what a bank does. There are 3 main areas of activity in any bank. And for those of you also in accounting or business, you'll recognize where they sit. On the asset side of a bank's balance sheet are loans and investments. It's very important that the lending be aligned with values and the investments. On the liability side sits all those deposits from our customers. And we have to make sure that our product set makes them healthier the day after they take a product than the day before. And then there's what we do, how we show up every day, our corporate practices. And we align with a number of certifications to make sure that we're a beneficial employer and community citizen as well. We also have to be safe and sound and financially successful. So I'm going to whip through these, but these are all good. The trends are all good. So growth is good. Growth in pre-tax income is good. Growth in loans is very important. That's our magic tool. That's the strongest thing we do. And we have to satisfy our return on equity and return on assets, but we're the only company I know of that brackets it. We have a minimum of 6%, which we achieved, then we became tax paying, then we achieved it, then we had to investment spend, so we're constantly nibbling at the 6% return on equity, but we don't want to make more than 10% return on equity. If we do, we're either not paying our employees well enough or we're charging our customers too much. And this is the range of return on equity that the Global Alliance for Banking on Values in a longitudinal study of the banks most adherent to their values achieved 8 to 10% return on equity for 10 years through the Great Recession. If you look at other bank returns, they skyrocket up and then they go into the basement and they come back up. That's no way to make a living. We have to be smart, efficient in our use of resources, and our resources money. So we have to have a low cost of funds and we have to have an adequate net interest margin on our loans. We have to worry about credit quality every minute of every day. Particularly in unusual economic cycles like we have now, credit quality is king. Those are all, credit ratios are good when they go down. And we have to recruit an excellent management team and excellent governance to preside over this unique model. We have to build a strong culture. Our culture is based on these 3 values, plus an extra one thrown in called creativity, because we've been on the design side and made things up as we've gone every second. But the most important values to us are trust. Nobody's going to work with a financial institution if they don't gain your trust. But that trust goes beyond just the money. It's the trust to be in league with people to produce the best place to live and work for all. We have to pursue justice because that's what we're trying to correct in the banking system. If this is crowdfunding, justice is a very strong value. And we have to make people more powerful. We have to democratize banking. We have such extreme income and wealth inequality right now. We have to do this about as rapidly as anything we've ever done. We have to offer good products and services. And just as an example, every bank has an overdraft policy. We work really hard on ours. We're constantly innovating in it because overdrafts are a way that a bank that says they're giving you a free checking account actually ends up charging on average $500 a year for that free checking account. Small practice change. Almost every bank in the system processes checks from the largest to the smallest to maximize the number of overdrafts in a day, because then you get to collect more fees. So we're smallest to largest. We cap how many overdrafts we'll charge in a day, and we have the lowest overdraft fees that I know of in the industry. So mission has to be at the heart of everything we do, especially our products and services. We have 3 design features that keep us aligned in the public interest. The first one is unique to us, and I don't suggest that the other banks are going to adopt this, but they'll have something light like it, and I'll explain that in a minute. 100% of the economic rights of Beneficial State Bank belong to a public charity foundation called Beneficial State Foundation. That public charity foundation is permanently governed in the public interest. The majority of the board is appointed by the largest nonprofit affordable housing developer on the West Coast, representing everyone's right to safe and affordable housing, a large educational organization representing everyone's right to higher education, and the Tides Community Foundation, representing our need for community reinvestment. No private shareholder can control, no private shareholder can get any profit. Most private shareholders are motivated to maximize their own profit, almost always at the expense of a triple bottom line. So we are allowed by our ownership structure to pursue social justice, environmental well-being, and the economic sustainability equally. No, one is never sacrificed to another. And at the end of the day, if and when profits are distributed through the dividending process, they can only go to Beneficial State Foundation, and our bylaws there mandate that those profits be reinvested into the low-income communities that we serve or the environment upon which we depend. Right now, we're not distributing dividends. We're retaining our earnings, which is prudent when you're growing. But we capitalize the foundation so that it can give roughly 5 to 10%, the equivalent of our profit every year, into the communities that we serve in the environment through a locally based sponsorship program driven by our colleagues in the branch offices. Second design feature is that lending practice. If we are crowdfunding, that's what matters most, and it has to be allegiant to our multi-stakeholder group. So first and foremost, our ideal is that the lending practice achieves all benefit and no harm. If you think about the train of misery, the real problem is the harm that's being done in the bank's lending practices. We hear plenty of, you have billboards all over town telling you how the big lenders are serving your community. They're not telling you what the harm is that's being dragged behind. So in our lending practice, 75% of our loan dollars have to be in a new economy that's fully inclusive, racially and gender just, environmentally restorative. And the other 25% can't be working against our triple bottom line. It can be neutral at best. That's a preponderance because we're trying to stand in the existing economy that's serving literally no one and reach into the future one. So we have to make sure our energy and resources are predominantly going that direction. We measure it not only in terms of output, that would be where do the loan dollars land, but what do they produce when they get there? Things we really need, like affordable housing and renewable energy. Things like a fair and transparent access to credit. It will not finance things we can't afford anymore, like fossil fuels, neither exploration, development, refinement, or transportation. People ask me, like, well, don't you finance companies that use trucks? And I say, yep, we stand in this economy to get to the next. And once we've addicted everyone to fossil fuels, we can't expect them to give them up overnight. But we're timetabling to an economy that is increasingly less dependent upon fossil fuels. On the consumer side, we also need to provide access to credit is the thing that consumers lack the most. Debt is addictive and can be a trap. Access to credit is what people need. So we are not trying to maximize debt. We're trying to give people the resiliency of fair and transparent credit if and when they need it for life's lumpy expenses. We also are working on restoring people's ability to save and save in an accelerated manner. So individual development accounts are a tax-preferred vehicle for doing that. And we must deliver financial literacy. That's part of financial empowerment. If people don't understand the banking system or how their money can work for them and against them, then they're behind the curve. And that figure is actually 4,000 people trained in the FDIC Money Smart program by one colleague, Raphael, who is magnificent. We're working on more scalable online delivery as well. The third design feature is we have to be radically transparent about everything we do. What I just told you about the lending practice is a measure of radical transparency, but there are many other things. Remember when I said there's the asset side, the liability side, and that's how we show up. So we have to be third-party auditable, data-driven, and we have to publish our outcomes so that our stakeholders can know everything they possibly could want to know about us. It begins with our internal practices, and beneficial employment is right at the top of the list. We practice a living wage policy where all of our colleagues earn 150% of living wage. It's calculated by the MIT living wage calculator in all markets, fully benefited, no part-time work unless they request it. That is paying people to live, not just to work. We also extend a number of other benefits that encourage them to have the resources to be part of their community and volunteering and grant making and so on. We're working with our green teams every year to drive our greenhouse gas, landfill, and water footprint down per FTE and to mitigate with real carbon credits that which we can't. Diversity. If you don't choose diversity, you don't get it. We are very, very proactive about diversity. We're proud of these statistics, but we hope they get ever better. We have to put more and different people in charge, and the more is very important too. Distributed power models is what we're interested in. I know there's interest in this crowd about B corporations. So we strive for certifications not to boast, but to have a process of self-reflection that keeps us honest. We cheer quickly about what we did right, and then we go right to where's the room for improvement. So we are a community development financial institution, which is a treasury designation, hard to get, harder to keep these days. And it does mean that 60% of our lending is in LMI communities. But we're also a B corporation. We're now the highest rated in the United States, third highest in the world. That's 220 questions about all our corporate practices and impact that have to be documented every other year and are third-party certified. Then we take a lot of commitments and pledges, and we wade into political battles. It's illegal for us to wade into candidacies, but not on issues. We can talk about any issue we want because that's squarely in our bailiwick. And that JUST certification attests to the social justice practices that we pursue as a company around gender diversity, animal welfare, labor practices, you name it. And that's renewed annually. So all of that's really important. This is important too, but I am always nervous about this. Our stakeholders include our customers for sure, and this is a net promoter score. I'm showing this not so much to tout us because I think that 65% could come crashing down at some point. It just takes a couple of bad customer experiences, and we're not perfect. We're trying to do the best job we can, but the blocking and tackling of banking every day is very tough. But 65% is around, you ask customers how likely are you to recommend the bank to your friends or family, and the high scores get subtracted, the low scores get subtracted from the high scores on a scale of 10. So 65 is high. It's like where Nordstrom's and Zappos or people like that are, or companies like that. Look at the other bars though. US companies in general are at 5 to 10%. That means they're actually getting unreferred, not referred. And I don't even know how to think about the top, the US banks at negative 20%. Does that mean somebody's like running up to someone they've never even heard before and saying, get out of that bank? I don't know. But we don't do this alone. We have allies close in, and I'm going to talk about one of them, Radical Impact Partners, in just a minute, and then leave you free of my monologue. But we have to work with research universities, advocacy organizations, aligned venture funds, all sorts of groups, and then we have to also coalition. We have to be with in strong trade associations because we're fighting a David and Goliath battle. Honestly, Goliath doesn't have much chance to pivot, and David has, the odds are in David's camp. They were back then too. But it helps us if we can coalesce around policy issues. So we're on the board of Community Development Bankers Association. Right now there's a fierce effort by the biggest banks to deregulate the banks because they didn't have any culpability in the Great Recession, which is not believable at all. And you notice that the CFPB has been gutted and leadership put in charge basically to dismantle it. So it's an uphill battle right now. The Global Alliance for Banking on Values, I mentioned before, that's 40 of the most magnificent banks who are adhering to stakeholder values in some of the toughest markets to serve, like Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Syria. And so this is really important because what we're trying to restore is people power. We have too much dollar power right now, not just in electoral politics, but in the economy. We are now to a stage in American history where it's business that's running government, not vice versa. So how can we restore people power in our basic business institutions and expect more from business, not less, as we go forward? So I'm going to say just a few things because I know you're super interested in alternative tools. And you can see that I've barely mentioned philanthropy. Tom Steyer, my husband, runs NextGen and Need to Impeach. We both run the bank together. We both run the ranch together. None of those are philanthropies. They're all operating entities because it's the fundamental institutions of society that are the most powerful that are running amok and not serving those multi-stakeholder values. So we have to get inside them and gain the insights of what it really means to operate in the economy, what it really means to be in the democratic process. So we're very bullish on social enterprise, and I know that is a friendly topic in this room. It's really important to innovate on the basic business models, especially since we no longer have a polemic that gives us competition. We don't have a strong communist model challenging the capitalist model right now, although I augur that China is giving a good run at that. So we have to be more critical of our capitalistic organizations and design for reform and positive change. So I mentioned, well, I've been talking to you all about aligned banking. I mentioned we started 2 venture funds alongside the bank, and they're aligned with stakeholder values as well. One's called Radical Impact Partners. And I just want to give you an idea. We have 18 portfolio companies in there now. We're literally trying to change the model of venture too, because venture is expensive the way it's been done. Venture was premised on 1 home run, 9 disasters, and you make a lot of money. The disasters are really expensive for the people who work there and the consumers who grow dependent upon them. So we'd like a little bit more regenerative model of venture. But we also have enormous innovation coming up through social enterprises. So I'm going to read you a press release just from this morning about a portfolio company of ours called Neighborly. Neighborly Corporation, a San Francisco-based public finance technology platform, today announced it is partnering with the UC Berkeley Blockchain Lab and Berkeley elected officials to launch the Berkeley Blockchain Initiative. The BBI will leverage blockchain technology to develop a first-of-its-kind tokenized municipal bond compliant with all regulatory requirements. By working with Neighborly and the UC Berkeley Blockchain Lab, Berkeley is looking to harness the power of blockchain and the cryptocurrency movement for social good. Berkeley Mayor Jesse Argine commented, "Cities must look toward new funding methods to solve their most intractable problems, especially in the face of a diminished federal support. Berkeley is proud to once again be leading the way in solving problems through public financing. Through ongoing research and collaboration, the initiative will seek to identify ways that Neighborly's secure platform can be used to deliver low-cost, tax-exempt public finance offerings that could benefit residents of Berkeley and other municipalities. More importantly, the BBI will look to channel funds raised toward addressing some of the City of Berkeley's most pressing issues, including a lack of affordable housing and recent surges in its homeless population." So there is a return of public finance, municipal bond finance, to the things we actually want, like pollution mitigation, workforce housing, and bike paths. That's giving the power of finance back to the people. And those municipalities are standing as a proxy for all of the individuals who make up their constituents. The same thing is happening on the banking side. We're involved in the working groups on public banking initiatives, not just establishing a public bank, which we're supportive of the enthusiasm around that, but if we don't discipline the main banking system, public banks won't have a chance of turning that around. So we can get into the city of Seattle, the city of Los Angeles, the county of Alameda, the state of California, and give them insights as an operating bank about the standards they should hold their banks to and the RFP process that will allow more of us to bid for their business in alignment with their public purpose. So we also have pay for performance opportunities within the bank model. We're trying to lower the cost of capital for those business entities that produce the sort of positive externalities. So, for instance, we have a need for speed product in the multifamily housing arena right now that we're piloting to see if we can give a borrower higher loan to value, which displaces very expensive equity capital, if they will agree to constrain rents to low income or workforce housing levels. That's a pay for performance, meaning we're going to reinforce the practice of providing affordable housing by paying people more to do that. I'm going to close with one more story. And it's a juicy one. Remember, I'm supposed to make banking interesting for you. So all of us want to have meaningful work that makes ends meet. All of us depend upon healthy communities and the environment in which to thrive. And all of us are struggling right now to recast a constructive political conversation that will build a beautiful world that's a great place to live and work for all. So this story is about how we can achieve all through the practice of banking. It's called North River Boats. Few companies come to good when the owner heads into a global recession, embezzles from his own company, and then shoots his girlfriend dead at the county fair. But then maybe ordinary companies don't strive to do as much good as one coming out of that background. North River Boats has risen to its occasions time and again, and the bank is committed to its journey to the promised land. Brought out of the resulting bankruptcy by a famous California private equity firm, North River Boats first benefited from the talent and dedication of the installed turnaround CEO, Brent Hutchins. Brent has worked magic with a box manufacturing enterprise by recognizing efficiencies in a growing packaging need with internet and shipping-based economies. He thrives on business puzzles, and North River Boats represented his next. It had largely served a recreational boat market, and that turned out to be the tail of the whip if ever there was one. But Brent foreshadowed increasing demand for sophisticated boat hulls used in public safety and pivoted North River Boats to meet preponderantly that trend. As North River Boats revenues grew, Brent was able to add new lines and grow the job base from 40 to 140 good value-add living wage jobs in Roseburg, Oregon, which suffered 15% unemployment as recently as 2015. Roseburg, like many rural communities in the United States, was left behind by the curbing of clear-cut timber models, the rise of automation and artificial intelligence, and the deruralization that has resulted from lack of national economic planning. As much a matter of respect as neglect, rural communities feel the sting of casual national development paradigms in both political and economic ways, and Roseburg was no different. When tragedy struck in the form of a mass shooting on the local community college campus, no one escaped the devastating impact, including North River Boats, as the wife of a line foreman was seriously injured. North River Boats took up the mantle of corporate civic duty and led a campaign toward recovery as a highly regarded company in this local living economy. Along the way, Brent had cultivated this spirit of collaboration and innovation among his teams on the manufacturing floor as well, using Lean Six Sigma techniques to build an embedded efficiency advantage into proprietary manufacturing processes. This engagement with the rank and file, seemingly for only bottom line needs, also created an enlightened culture of inclusion and sharing that ultimately resulted in Brent offering a third of the company to the workers through an employee stock ownership plan. No ordinary bank came along for that whole journey. It took a formal recognition of the societal value of rebuilding rural economies, empowering workers, and paying them to live, not just to work, and a commitment to sharing power broadly, not consolidating it, to warrant the challenging design needs of bank finance every step of the way. The first transaction allowing Brent to buy the company out of the private equity firm required more debt than prudent for a bank to lend, so the bank recruited subordinated debt from a related foundation to complete the deal. This use of sub-debt in place of a down payment of the equity needed, if you will, is one of the few ways those without capital can compete with those who have amassed capital and can build, run, and own responsible companies. Finally, given the complexity of ERISA laws around ESOPs, few banks, if any, will undertake the understanding, underwriting, and monitoring of debt to finance employees' contributions into the equity of a company, unless they value the distributed model of shared ownership. All of these values, which Beneficial State Bank holds dear, fail to hit any real bottom line, and so have to be sought, hard-fought, and won from a commitment to values-based banking, nothing less. That's how we can contribute to a world that, in Roberto Unger's words, unlocks the constructive genius of every ordinary person. Into a dancer you have grown from the seed somebody else had thrown. Go on ahead and throw some seeds of your own, and somewhere between the time you arrive and the time you go may lie a reason you were alive that you'll come to know. Thank you very much.
Well, that was terrific, Kat, and I know our audience has a lot of questions for you, but I'm going to take the prerogative and just highlight a couple things that you gave us that I think is worth reflecting a little bit deeper, at least from my mind, and I know that our audience has a number of things as well. So tell us a little bit about your journey that led you to not take a traditional philanthropy approach or some other approach, but to say, you know what, I can do the most good by entering the financial sector to do the work that you did here.
So a couple things. One is that there are big systems that host a number of other business activities. And in my mind and Tom's mind, they're the most important to get right. It is really important to have a great yogurt that disciplines its supply chain and mitigates for environmental damage, but that yogurt is circulating in a food system. And if the food system is corrupt, then that yogurt has a harder time. So we wanted to go systemically approaching reform to get the rails right, if you will. And the only way you can really understand how the system's working, we believe, is by being a part of it, so that you actually experience what it's like to be regulated, what it's like to compete in the marketplace, what it's like to go through a huge downturn, things like that. Oh, the other thing about philanthropy, which we think is really important, we still do quite a lot of it, but we don't consider ourselves philanthropists anymore, per se, because philanthropy is the tail of the dog, and it can't cure the dog. We have to get the dog right. So the fact, honestly, that we have a lot of new money going into philanthropy worries me, because it all depends on how it's invested while it's awaiting distribution as grants. So we're very strong proponents of the divest invest movement as well, because balance sheets need to be aligned with the purpose of that grant making, or else you're going backwards.
Yeah. No, that's great. So just talking about the certified B corporation a little bit. So in the context that you're operating, one could imagine you could choose to go and get certification to do exactly what you do, and you could choose not to. Perhaps you could speak a little bit about your own beneficial bank's advantages in being part of that network of certified B Corps, and then also talk about what you might imagine provide others who maybe you've even been connecting to in your networks to try to get that certification versus not, either financial advantages or other kinds of advantages.
Right. So we're actually the perfect test case for that, because given the ownership structure I described, and initially this was my mistaken assessment, we don't need B Corporate. We don't need benefit incorporation. What a benefit incorporation does for you largely is protect the company from a shareholder suit for failure to maximize profit because you're adhering to longer term values. Well, we don't have a private shareholder. So I took a pass for a couple of years, honestly, until some interns from Presidio School of Management came and said, like, let us just take you through the process.
Right.
And I was so wrong. So going through the process is inherently good because you have to be really granular about the way you self-assess. And you have to have somebody standing out there who's the school marm who'll say, like, well, that's not really true. Like, where's the documentation of that? So the process is very beneficial. You don't actually have to either reincorporate as a B corporation or join the community to take the assessment. You can take it just as a discipline, and there's even a short form of it that gives you a good sense of where you end up, and I highly recommend that. But the other advantage is that scale usually comes at the expense of accountability. We have these massive corporations lumbering around the planet who are not responsive, are not aware of what they're doing, and therefore they're not accountable. So we don't want that, but we do need scale to compete, because scale is what brings you efficiencies and economies of scale and so on and so forth. So joining communities is actually one way to get scale. The B corporations who are over 2,000 now partner a lot. They give each other discounts and stuff like that, but also they're just creating an ecosystem that helps every individual player be stronger. And you can also achieve scale, not in your own organization, but through your supply chain, say, or through your geographic market. So I think increasingly collective effort is important, not only on the advocacy and policy side, but really on business execution. So I highly recommend B incorporation. We're not actually incorporated as a B benefit corporation right now, but we're going through the process.
Yeah, we actually were envisioning, suppose I wanted to be a affordable housing developer, and I had one of our students working in the center kind of imagine what that looks like. And you said it is a really interesting process of self-discipline in terms of thinking about what activities do you really need to get to demonstrate such social impact and so forth. Well, I want to make sure that the audience has a lot of opportunity. I'm going to ask you only one more question at this point. I might reserve the right to later. But what advice do you give students who want to become innovators themselves in their careers?
Thank you. You just reminded me to say a couple of things to you students in the room. First of all, to believe in the power of business, and that your opportunity to change the world for the better doesn't mean that you have to rush to government or the nonprofit sector, although those are really important too. We believe in government. Government is us. But for all that we need to have good government, we also need the business community to shape up, because we're basically experiencing 500 years of capital beating up on labor, and it keeps winning. And when you beat up on labor, those are people. When you beat up on inputs, that's the natural world. So we need reform actors in the business community, and I think it's a fantastic time for young people to go innovate. They've never seen anything they didn't think was possible, and that mindset alone is really important. The companies that come to us for venture funding are magnificent. They just have reimagined the world, and they think people are beautiful and nature is important, and so they instill that into their beliefs. The bank does run an internship program. I'd highly recommend you come over and talk to us, Monique, Chuck, Ruben, anybody on that table over there, about summer internship opportunities. We run a program that's very serious on the curriculum, sort of banking 101 with a progressive mindset, and but also a speaker series within the internship, and a real deliverable project where you're working on something the bank actually needs with the mentorship of an executive in the bank. So that's just one way to get engaged. But I applaud you all who are studying social enterprise, because it's a very promising and necessary change in the basic business organization of the economy.
Thanks, Kat. So turning over to the audience, what are the questions on top of mind for you?
In the community bank space, there's usually a significant amount of investment, commercial real estate assets.
Yes.
Especially if you're not a big consumer bank. Share a little bit about your bank's philosophy with commercial real estate, and especially from my perspective, there's a lack of commercial real estate finance available in communities of color.
Yeah.
For people who live there and work there.
Yes, yeah. So a problem for us became a great opportunity in that I mentioned or maybe earlier, we were chartered in 2007. We think we were the last charter extended before the recession. And we were supposed to be half commercial bank and half residential mortgage bank, but there wasn't a consumer left standing, and we certainly weren't going to lend into the residential mortgage markets. We did do a lot of work on foreclosure prevention, but it was like stopping a speeding train. So we bided our time to get back into consumer lending that would matter to the constituents that we are trying hardest to serve. It came in an opportunity to build a large multifamily lending program. That's basically apartment finance, 50 units and less at our size. Those are really important units of housing. The residents of small multifamily, which is what that's called, are typically about 81% low to moderate income. And it is increasingly hard for renters to join the home ownership movement because the price of entry is so high. So we wanted to lend into multifamily markets, not only to increase the capital there, particularly in communities of color, but also to exercise any discipline we could to keep rents affordable in apartment lending. So that's why I mentioned that pay for performance product. We try to preference in our pipeline those properties that are at affordable levels and then create incentives for them to stay there. And housing has been a crisis in all our markets since we started. First foreclosure, now displacement and gentrification. And we're part of that. The banks have been historically a huge driver of both of those things. So we have to be part of the solution set. We don't have an express way of sort of disproportionately allocating multifamily loan capital to communities of color, but our footprint is helping us achieve that more. So we used to be concentrated in Oakland and Portland. Both of those are very important markets for foreclosure and displacement solutions, but now we're in 5 Central Valley branches and East LA and North Hollywood. And so our opportunity to extend the multifamily lending practice into community colors more assiduously is increasing. And not only that, but we need to add benefit to that practice. So if you think about apartment buildings, they're actually a pretty perfect platform for energy generation and energy retrofit towards renewables. It's a high cost in their net operating income. It's a high cost offset. And right now there's a landlord-tenant split where the incentive isn't aligned well to unleash that. So we really want to work hard to figure out how we could bring renewable energy to more apartment buildings in a way that redounds to the tenant's benefit. Because it's also, energy cost is a really high portion of a low income family budget as well. So a work in process, Michael. I can't say that we're perfect, but one thing that just is helping us out recently is that we're going to get to be the lender and implementation of a clean vehicle program. We're a large auto lender, pre-prime markets, and we want low-income people to be the first into hybrids and electric cars. It would benefit them disproportionately because gas is a higher portion of their household budget, and they live in the most polluted communities, so we need to clean up the air there first and foremost. So that includes charging stations, and we're looking at a partnership with Grid Alternatives to put more of those charging stations in low to moderate income multifamily apartment buildings as an additional source of revenue for the tenants. That's as far as I can get on that one. You could help us though.
May I ask one follow-up on how much of that activity in these buildings is around preservation of the currently naturally occurring affordable housing versus actually new construction?
So I think our multifamily portfolio is about 180 million, something like that. I'm totally guessing, but you saw the affordable housing statistics up there. So there's a reasonably high percentage, maybe like 25% is with nonprofit affordable developers. We are not a ground-up construction lender, so when we're creating new, it's in a housing pool fund, but we are in those as well. We are very big in the preservation, and we try to, that's where we're trying to lower the cost of capital for people. The private markets deliver most of the housing in the United States, so we have to not only support the nonprofit developers, we have to really discipline the private markets to hold rents down and affordable. So that's a big initiative.
Thanks. And then up here we had a question, and then a couple in the back.
I was curious if Beneficial State Bank does anything in the microloan area for low income and banking the unbanked, who now that community primarily has to turn to predatory lenders like payday lenders.
Great question. Many and all things a little bit, but none of them to scale just yet. So the cost structure of a bank is pretty punishing for small dollar loans, and you have to pass that price along to the borrower, so that's not mission aligned either. So we're an SBA lender, and we're trying to create efficiency in our own organization to lower the minimum dollars that we can efficiently do, getting down to more like $50,000 loans. That's still pretty high. That's not what most people consider microcredit. But we, in partnership with loan funds who are better at originating at low cost, small dollar loans, able to recycle their capital. So for instance, Opportunity Fund, which is a large loan fund that lends, we participate in a program with them that provides truck acquisition and retrofit finance for independent truckers. So these are more like $25,000 loans to qualify those companies to go onto port sites because they're compliant with air quality standards. They're very good at originating those loans. They seize them for a while. We buy portfolios of that. That recycles their capital to go do more. That's a really good role for our bank. It's a win-win all the way around because it improves air quality in the communities most affected by childhood asthma too. We could do more of those, and we're looking for more partnerships with loan funds who have that low-cost origination, but we have access to capital that they would lack. They don't have leverage in their model either, so automatically by the time you put bank capital in that, you've just added leverage, which increases the impact and the volume of business.
You're going to fund lower, smaller outfits too.
Yeah. And then on the consumer side, we are the issuer of a card called the L Card through L Card Services. It's a pre-prime credit card, so it's higher price credit card, but it's unsecured credit. And credit cards are really important for people to have. They have to be fair. They can't be filled with fees and traps and stuff, but people really need access to credit. I think we have about 60,000 cards outstanding right now, and that is a good way to avoid payday lending or refinance out of payday lending. We're running numbers, trying to study that to see if that's actually helping that problem. Payday has plagued us since we were born as well. And then branch banking. Everybody's not sure where branch banking is going. Millennials, 62% of millennials don't have a credit card, any sort, by the way, so we have a looming sort of credit access problem, because by the time they go to get one, they're going to get the worst price and term. But they also want to do all their banking on a phone, except the first time, and who blames them? Who could blame them? They want to walk in and meet a person. But it's expensive to have unused infrastructure, like a whole branch, for a person to walk in once. So we have 17 branch offices. I dare say we'd be very careful about adding any more, and we're looking at alternative, innovative channel distribution. Either not just mobile on your phone, but mobile in a truck, or piggybacking off of other infrastructure, like collaboration with other banks that may serve a totally different segment of the market, or even infrastructure like the post offices. You know, like by the time they're down to delivering 3 mails and everything else is coming through Amazon, what are they to do? The Canadian Post Office just redesigned themselves, and they now take deposits, which was Benjamin Franklin's original idea, that post offices would disseminate information to the citizenry and take money into the financial system. So maybe we should look at that again. And in Canada, the postal delivery people are now checking in on elderly shut-ins to help the healthcare system reduce costs. So it's a time of innovation, and everything you ask for is super important. We just have to be careful about how we do that in the modern economy.
Wow, that was a heck of an answer.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your governance structure? I mean, given that you are disrupting the industry and in your DNA, innovation is in your DNA, What have you been looking for in terms of finding the right kind of members of your board? And yeah, just let me leave it at that.
Yeah. I'm sensing that you know something about the elevated responsibilities of a bank director. It's punishingly high. It's beyond the normal corporate fiduciary duty. There's actually personal liability for malfeasance. And you could see how you could get to that in this environment. So it's hard for us to have a really egalitarian board because of that. It's hard for a person of low resources, to accept that responsibility. So honestly, the Beneficial State Foundation Board has more of an opportunity because those members are appointed by those 3 large public charities, and they're just safeguarding the mission of those organizations. So we can be more class egalitarian on that board than we've had the opportunity to be on the bank board. Diversity-wise, we're very diverse on both boards, and that's a mandate, just has to be. And so we're finding, well, first of all, we seem to never let anyone go. So some of our bank directors have been on since 2005 in the formation period. And we get marvelous new input from new sectors of the economy like technology and AI and so on. So we're getting younger board members too. But it's a total work in process. And it reminds me, because we have to get it right. We're pretty good now, but we could be better. And I don't know how to insulate someone of low resources, so I just haven't figured that out yet. But the same conundrum is going to come up. So we're fans of the public banking movement, and the instinct is all correct about that. That's about alignment and about using public deposits in favor of local needs, including the heartfelt desire that some bank in the world somewhere could bank the cannabis industry, which is a large cash industry, which is bringing all sorts of promise in medicine and all sorts of good things, but it's also an open door for illegal activities, not by the cannabis industry, by money launderers who see an opportunity in an all-cash system, and crime and safety problems associated with it. So we would like to see some solution that involved public banks, but there's a couple of challenges with public banks, and the first one that we thought of was the board of directors. Who can accept the liability of a public bank directorship? The second is, what's the source of equity capital for a public bank? You can't just take in all deposits and not have equity. And then cannabis is a problem at the federal level, so we need a brokered solution. There is one bank in Colorado, amazingly, that is banking cannabis deposits, and the CEO, who's a woman, created a separate subsidiary that she put just herself in the early days, so that if anyone was going to go to jail, it was her. And they just asked her, like, what do you think the risk of going to jail is? She goes, it's much more reduced now. I think it's only 20%. But nobody's figured out how to lend to cannabis. So you're pointing out, banking is complicated and difficult, and it is a huge matter of public trust. We have 25 regulatory exams a year, 25, and we deserve them. We embrace our regulators because we have to be safe and sound to protect the depositors' money, but we also have to warrant fair lending. For centuries, the banks were not lending fairly. It was part of the racial caste system and discrimination. We need to protect people's information. Most of the breaches have come not from banks, but from credit agencies and big box retailers. We have to protect other sensitive information, and we have to combat money laundering, which is a real problem. And the banks are the only institutions that are actually set up to do anything about it. Not that we're perfect, but we do a lot better than an unregulated institution. So you're pointing out a lot of good architectural challenges.
I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for coming. I'm an undergraduate business student who, for lack of better words, doesn't want to sell her soul to the corporate world. So it's great to see you as a successful woman in the business world making a difference. But my question is, you kind of mentioned that you are looking to now be a benefit corp and kind of going through that process. So it's a twofold question. First of all, why did you choose to start as a B Corp rather than a benefit corporation in the beginning? And secondly, are you going to keep the B Corp, because it is very expensive, so are you going to keep the B Corp certification, or are you just going to stay with benefit if you are to get certified?
Yeah. In reverse order, we will always do the B Corp assessment to be part of that community and part of the transparency around it and the recruitment of others. That this is an important warranty of all American corporations. They should all be that transparent, whether they join or not. So that expense is an easy one to swallow. It's not too big. The one-time expense of reincorporating, in our case, as a benefit corporation in Delaware, we've just been convinced to do it because the B Corp community has naysayers and antagonists who want to poke a hole in the model. So they're, insisting on, when you do something good, you have to be like 100% pure for some reason, but they want everyone compliant. So we're happy to do that one-time expense for them. We didn't do it in the beginning because we actually have more protections than the benefit incorporation will give us. So we're kind of putting on weak suspenders after we have a really strong belt.
Yeah.
And I actually bank with Beneficial State.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm definitely one of the 65% on the, and I bore everyone about it. But one of the things that I know as someone who banks with the bank is that the way that you treat your staff, your employees, is really extraordinary. And that's part of the B Corp responsibility. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I think that where we're at now is, in a society sense, is that the corporation view outside the B Corporation model of how employees are treated is becoming increasingly undermined. And yet what you're standing for by being a B Corp and by the way you have your practices with your own employees is against that tide.
Yeah. So I mentioned, and I can never say it enough, that capital's been beating up on labor, and we're in favor of labor because that's people. And we're in favor of the planet because that's inputs. So we do, it is, and no commitment is a real commitment without a sacrifice. So it is definitely more expensive to pay 150% of living wage in all markets. And we have to account for compression too. So by the time everybody's at those levels, then they have to all kind of work together so that the organization has rationality to it. So it's even more expensive for that. And then we want to have a really strong benefits package, and that's expensive too. And here we are in an age when labor is going to be demanded less, ostensibly because of automation and artificial intelligence. So we're kind of going against the economic trends. If we were just transactional, we could probably get labor cheaper now than we did before, but we don't want to do that because we don't think of it as a commodity. We think of it as the brilliant human beings that will make the bank stronger from a cultural standpoint and realize innovations. So what we're counting on is that longer tenure and deeper engagement and commitment will produce outside values that we can't even anticipate from paying people to live, not just to work. It's an obligation of ours anyway, so we're going to figure out how to do it. Having said that, and there are other non-financial parameters too, like we want to put more and different people in charge. We just do. So that's not just looking at the diversity of the C-suite, but how can we empower employees at all levels of the organization to have input as to how we run the business, what our green footprint is. We have a fitness challenge on right now. I'm part of a team called the Misfits. But anyway, sort of creating a fully empowered organization. One of my friends once said to me, like, wow, banks are kind of like the proletariat. Everybody's there. So that's the point. Like, it's a mini society, so let's make it a healthy one. Notwithstanding all that, we have to recognize these big trends. So we participate in something called the Economic Security Working Group that's looking at concepts like universal basic income and other strategies to create societal value not related to the transactional value of labor. So what is the value of the person who always brings a good sense of humor to the party? Like, that doesn't get paid for anywhere unless you're a stand-up comic. Or, the more traditional things like what is the value of childcare or elder care or the value of the poet or the painter. So I think we have to be part of those conversations because we might be living in a world that we could never have imagined, and the thing we know we need to avoid is desperation. So we don't, that's the most expensive thing to society, I think. So.
I'm Nick Duquette. I'm faculty here at the Price School, and I teach nonprofit management and social innovation to the students here. So my question is actually about the organizational structure that you settled on for BSB. Having a commercial bank holding corporation inside of a 501c3. I normally tell my students not to think about those sorts of things because you have to pay corporate income tax on the business, and then often you get hit again at the 501c3 level with an unrelated business tax. And not that paying taxes is bad, but this creates a headwind where you might retain that income and use it for the purposes that are you are more passionate about than whatever the U.S. Treasury is going to do with the money.
Yeah.
So my question to you, I guess, is how how you settled on that particular organizational structure and what advantages you find it confers relative to, say, some kind of tax-exempt entity or a mutually owned by depositors model or something a little more conventional.
Yep. So honestly, the most tax-preferred model is a credit union. And it has a lot of the attributes of our ownership because it's run by the members. And if it's a responsible credit union, it really can be run by the members, and it's single taxed. This is why banks hate credit unions, by the way. That snuck in some deal, and they haven't been able to undo it. So we thought about that, but the problem is that credit unions are either geographically or occupationally defined. And my husband, Tom Sire, and I could not actually be a member of our own credit union because it's based in Oakland, and we live in San Francisco. So we looked at that for a long time. You just put a question in my head too, because I'm familiar with UBIT, the unrelated business income tax for a nonprofit, and I was thinking this. Personally, I don't think the new tax plan was a good idea, but I was wondering, maybe that's one small advantage is if we ever get hit with UBIT, it'll be lower now, but I don't know. But the honest answer is, aside from considering a credit union model, and I mentioned we've always been on the design side and making things up as we go. The reason we decided on the ownership structure is we knew it would be bad for us to profit. As two people of privilege, to profit from a bank serving the underserved was an instant no-go. That's not happening, or even appear to be. So we had to come up with a bright line like, nope, there's no way they're getting profit from this bank. And that's when we decided to contribute 100% of the economic rights instantaneously upon the start of the bank into that nonprofit organization. And it became a public charity so we could avoid the private foundation rules and get that public governance structure in there. And that's as far as we thought. And then we sort of sat down and watched the rest of the thing unfold. So it meant we had to have a mid-tier bank holding company, which is an extra institution. That's costly too, because one bank can't issue two classes of stock. So we have voting rights stock and economic rights stock that sit in that bank holding company. And that's the investment process as well. So it's likely not the most efficient model, but it solved for so many other things that we had to optimize at the time we just went with it. We're now looking at, so we want to pluralize the governance on the voting rights side, because Tom and I kept all the voting rights stock, and we're not going to be here forever. So, but also we could have stronger governance. I should have addressed that. That means that we appoint the majority of the bank board, not the bank foundation, but the bank board. And that should be pluralized over time for resiliency and representation. So we just raised the first outside capital, still in a charitable vehicle for a family office, and they will get voting rights. And they care about local living economies, so they'll exercise those voting rights well. We have a large community foundation looking at putting some capital in, and having a large community foundation appoint a piece of the bank board would be great because they actually do have bench strength that can afford to take on the liability and has the financial acumen. And we want to find a way for our own employees to participate in governance and profit sharing. We were looking at an ESOP, but oh my God, their ERISA laws, mind-boggling. And we got feedback from employees that they don't necessarily want that. They don't, like, you over-concentrate a person in their place of work when you make them invest their money in an ESOP. So we're still figuring it out. So, and actually, if you want to pick it apart with your class, that would be so interesting. We have, Stanford Graduate School of Business has written 3 cases on the bank model, and it goes past their student investment committee every year. So if you want to talk about a partnership around corporate design, I'm all in.
Sounds good. Up front here.
Yeah.
I had a question.
I was just going to say, you're obviously one of the more informed people that I've heard speak around banking and so forth, which is refreshing. Can you talk a little bit about singing?
You've discovered that I'm a rank amateur at both. So I learned a lot about banking in the process of starting a bank. I was not the original CEO of the bank. I wasn't qualified to be the original CEO of the bank. But I do have banking in my background. But as a family, my grandfather was the CEO of Crocker National Bank from 1950 to 62 or something like that. And that made me pretty sure I was never going into banking, to be honest. Although that was a great regional bank. For its time, it was progressive. Singing, I'm going to answer you seriously because I personally, I love singing, but it never occurred to me to do it. I don't do it professionally. I'm not trained. The only reason I do it for the bank is that we have to distinguish this model from every other one. And so far, I haven't found another CEO willing to sing.
That's great.
I'm curious about the profile of your depositors and how well it matches the target communities you look for.
It didn't at all in the beginning, to be honest. So we had a lot of people who wanted to support the bank who were high net worth individuals. They wanted to invest in it, and we said, oh my God, no. This should make things more complicated. So we asked them to place their deposits there. So we have deposits from, weirdly, on either ends of the spectrum, from high net worth individuals, large foundations, large nonprofits that really help us, and they're sticky and they stay a long time because we're giving them a value too. We're giving them alignment. Their constituents might not want them to be banking with the other banks. So, and that's increasingly come on as a narrative that's compelling. Because we weren't a consumer bank in the beginning, we had maybe 4,000 transactional accounts. That's not very many. Now we have 12,000 auto loan borrowers. And they don't have to be depositors to be an auto loan borrower. They can literally pay their loan in cash, but they are a perfect audience for aligned consumer products, from responsible credit cards to deposit accounts to accelerated savings. So that's our great hope, is that we'll pluralize the deposit base increasingly over time as well. And online products too, I think, will help us do that. So.
Do you bank any municipalities, state, or localities? Because again, in the partnership to advance the mission, they're a big player in this. I know that the Treasurer Chung,
Yep.
slapped Wells Fargo. So the question is, how do you align in communities and do you bank municipalities? The second is, there's $25 trillion in retirement accounts. So does your retirements of your employees go to mission-aligned investments that align with beneficial state bank?
Yeah. In reverse order, so you guys can check my accuracy here, but our benefits provider allows choice in the 401k investments that include, but we leave that choice to our employees. We don't mandate, but the universe of products options in the 401k space we give them are pretty aligned. So they're going to pick within a range. I thought you were going somewhere else with this too, because eventually we want to democratize wealth management too. So we are constantly looking, especially through the venture organizations, at smaller dollar wealth management opportunities that we could instill as a bank product set. As you might know, that means we would have to have Series 7 trained employees, and we don't have that yet. So it's kind of a chicken and egg. We got to have the scale to offer that product, but we're definitely going there. And then municipal banking is all the rage right now, and we're so thrilled. And I'm so glad you asked that, because I'll get a chance to relate it to our theory of change. So dismantling any industrial system is really hard, whether it's ag or finance or even the internet. So you guys in Los Angeles were ahead of the curve, so is City of Seattle, their city council. Under constituent pressure, and that's important, the municipal decision makers are realizing that they have to provide an aligned banking relationship for their constituents, and they've got two things in the way. One is they have an RFP process that's not accessible by smaller institutions. They bid it all out in one thing, so they get the dance of the lemons. If they throw one big money center bank out, there's only 6 other banks that could bid for that business because of the nature of the RFP. So they're starting to break up the RFP. I think Seattle split theirs into 3, and Los Angeles split theirs 6. So that's starting to get to a place where we can bid on a piece of it without having to go to ourselves at our expense building a bank consortium that presents as a single entity. That's really important. And the other thing is that just the scale of some of these things like lockbox or payroll or, you know, a $60 million sweep account, we need more product options because we don't have these huge balance sheets. Then there's the internal workings, like how does the treasurer or the mayor or whatever make sure that the head of finance actually executes on that, because it's kind of a pain to them. That's why they went to the big banks in the first place. It's easier to go with one provider. But if they get enough reinforcement, let's say, to do that, then they will. And there are some real market movers, like this woman who's running the County of Placer Finances is aligning their securities portfolio too, which is very exciting. The most exciting thing for us, I think, because remember I said we can't change the banking system or replace it ourselves, we have to recruit others who may not have mission in their statement, but are acting that way. So when we just went to the County of Alameda's treasurer's working group on aligning their banking, we weren't the only bank in the room talking like us. None of the money center banks were there. There were 4 other banks that are local and regional and were talking all the right talk. They were willing to make commitments about alignment with stakeholder values to get that business. So that's a little evidence of the theory of change starting to happen.
I have just a final question, and this is a hard one because it may not have occurred yet, but your business practices and your employee practices certainly provide the opportunity for ideas for changing even how you do things to come from the customer base and or your employees. Do you have an example you can point to that because of the way that you engage your stakeholders that actually has led to change in how you've done things to date?
3 examples. One is...
Not just one.
I have to remember them all. So one of the reasons we went to change the core platform is that we need to have a system that allows us to engage in user-driven design. So that is a pull process, not a push. Right now we're pushing product, but we don't know how it's landing unless somebody volunteers. So one day I hope we have literally the technology means of doing that. But in the meantime, we have important customers who let us know what they like and what they don't like. And one of them, Alice, noted that while we have alignment, we were not conveying it credibly to the credit card stakeholder base. And she's very concerned about a large credit card issuer called REI that she wants to be sure is aligned. And so she just, called us up and said, how come I can't read this on your website? How come it doesn't tie to the divest level 1, 2, 3 standards? So the squeaky wheel really helps us, and we have others. Another one was, we run something called a CDARS program where we can dole out large deposits in a way that they're fully FDIC insured. It isn't the deposit itself, it's just the insurance. And she was concerned that that meant that we were complicit with large banks, and we had to think hard about how we got to communicate this better. So that's not actually changing product, but changing the value proposition statement. On the other end, I think in Radical, we see financial disruption all the time. We probably have 6 or 7 fintech companies in that portfolio. And they're all, most of them are disintermediating some aspect of banking, but there's one called GECO that could put banks completely into the land of irrelevancy. Just a complete bypass where every person owns their own financial health records, every kind of information they have, and they can fully access large-scale markets, like go straight to the municipal markets or straight to the housing, which is thrilling. And I actually think that's important to have that mindset, that if you're in the business of solving big problems, you have to be willing to put yourself out of business, because that's a good thing. So if one day we don't have to be a bank anymore because you guys can just get everything you want straight with your own financial information, that would be the ultimate in distributed power.
Well, but until that day, we're glad that BSB is in business, and we're really happy to have you here to share with our community today.
Thank you very much.